Different when I was growing up. Still much different than that, I think.
Well, good evening. It's 7 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Chanel Dixon. I'm the Executive Director of Idaho Solutions. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview if you weren't here at our last lecture. This series is in the Magic Valley, and it's designed to inform and engage Idahoans on critical issues impacting our state. We appreciate all of you being here tonight. We plan to expand this series statewide next year as we partner with other groups around the state to bring education to Idahoans, providing valuable insights and fostering deeper understandings of issues in our 4 focus areas. So you can see our poster over there, but we have 4 main areas that we focus on: good governance, strong education, good business policy, and sustainable tax structure. So the things that fall under those are the things that you'll find that we have the lecture series about. We aim to inform Idahoans and provide tools, and another thing that we're starting are small group conversations that will surround books or historical essays so that people can discuss. We're trying to engage the public and get people back to just having conversations. And so that's one of our projects that we're working on. You will see over on that table we have flyers that talk about Idaho Solutions. I would encourage you to take one and learn a little bit more about us. And then we do have the flyers, if you didn't grab one on your way in, about the lecture series and some of the upcoming ones. Next month we will have one about immigration, and we have a fantastic panel for that also. And that will be April 15th at 7 p.m. also in the Herod Center. So when you sat down, you saw cards. Those are, we'll have a Q&A tonight, and those are for you to write your questions down. And so after you've written a question, Cindy Wilson and Emily Nelson in the back will gather those, and so you can just kind of hold them up, and they'll gather those up for us. Tonight, our topic is Understanding School Vouchers in Idaho, the impacts, opportunities, and challenges. So I encourage you to think about some questions that you'd like to hear from our panelists. Tonight we're going to, well, our format, we have kind of a guest speaker, and then he will moderate the discussion, and he will introduce our panelists. And so I'll go ahead and introduce Rod Grammer. I very much appreciate all of our panelists being here tonight. Rod Grammer is the former president and CEO of Idaho Business for Education, a group of more than 200 business leaders working to help transform the Idaho education system into one of the best in the country. A system that sets our students up for success in school, work, and life, and create a highly educated and skilled workforce for Idaho's economy into the 21st century. And they do great work. So I've appreciated their work over the years. Before joining IBE, Rod spent 38 years working as a reporter, a newspaper editor, and a television news executive, and he has just a great background. He worked for the Idaho Statesman for 14 years. He served as the political editor and editorial page editor and columnist. He spent 10 years as the executive news director at KTVB, the NBC affiliate in Boise, including moderating the Viewpoint Public Affairs program. He also served for 13 years as the executive news director at the NBC station in Portland, Oregon, and he finished his journalism career as vice president and general manager of Bay News 9, a 24-hour news station located in Tampa Bay, Florida. He's also the author of 3 books, so they sound delightful, and I think I need to go read them because I haven't read them yet. One is Fighting the Odds, The Life of Senator Frank Church, which he co-authored with historian Leroy Ashby. And then he produced in 2021, Lucky, The Wit and Wisdom of Governor Phil Batt. And that was interestingly published by Caxton Printers, Idaho's oldest printing house. So that's kind of unique. And he's also the author of a novel, The Good Assassin, a political thriller which came out in April of 2014. So Rod is very involved in the community. He serves in a variety of boards, and he was a founding board member of the City Club in Boise. And he also served 2 terms as president of the Idaho Press Club. So he has vast experience, and I'm excited to have him come. I was so happy that he would agree to come and speak to us tonight. He's an Idaho native, graduated from the University of Idaho with a degree in journalism and history. And then in 2021, he received an honorary doctorate in humane letters from the University of Idaho. He and his wife have been married for 47 years. His wife, Julie, is actually from Gooding, Idaho, so she's from our neck of the woods. They raised 2 children who are 4th generation Idaho natives. So we'd like to welcome Rod Grammer.
Let's turn the microphone on. I think I might know this stuff.
Can you hear me? Okay. Hopefully we won't get any feedback. Thank you, Chanel, for that great introduction. I think my mother wrote that, and thank you for that. And I will be introducing our distinguished panel here in a few minutes. As Chanel explained, I'm going to make a few opening comments about vouchers here in Idaho and also, especially elsewhere. And then I'll introduce our panel, and they will have up to 10 minutes to talk about how they think vouchers are going to affect their schools. So first of all, I have been following this issue for the last 8 years, the voucher issue. For the last 7 years, because the first voucher bill was introduced in the Idaho legislature in 2018. And there was a voucher bill introduced every year since 2018. And IDE, along with our great partners in the state, really defeated vouchers until this year. And as you know, voucher bill passed this year in the legislature. And I'll talk about that in a second. But about 3 or 4 years ago, as I was battling this issue, I really, when I first started hearing about vouchers, I really had an open mind. I brought a journalist's eye to this issue. I was not an educator, as you know from my resume. I don't claim to be an educator, but I've always been a passionate supporter of education, which is one of the reasons I left journalism and I became president of IDE. But, so I brought a journalist's eye to this. I had no opinion. I really didn't know much about this issue. But about 3 or 4 years ago, I took a page out of Stephen Covey's book. Many of you are about my age, so maybe you read Stephen Covey's bestseller, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I highly recommend to people. Well, one of his habits was begin with the end in mind, if you remember that. And so I thought, if I wanted to know what would happen in Idaho if we ever passed a voucher bill, I needed to go and study what happened in all these other states that had vouchers for several years. And I'd have a better idea about what would happen to our state, to our education system, if I did that. So, so I started researching states like Indiana, Ohio, Wisconsin, Florida, Arizona, states all across the country that have had vouchers for years. And the highlights I'm going to just share with you tonight is based on that deep research that I've done over the last 3 or 4 years into what has happened in these other states. So first of all, the first voucher bill was passed the first modern voucher bill was passed in 1990 in the state of Wisconsin. It might surprise some folks that it was sponsored by an African-American state senator, a Democrat. And she sponsored the bill because at that time, the school districts in Milwaukee still had a legacy of racism. And the schools were segregated, essentially. And of course, the schools were black kids went were underfunded, and they were poor schools compared to the schools that the white kids would go to. So Polly Williams sponsored this bill in the Wisconsin legislature so that her kids, her inner city black kids, could transfer from public schools to private schools and religious schools. Well, as it turned out, it didn't work so well. And those students that she cared so deeply about really were not served. So within a few years after the bill passing, Polly repudiated her own piece of legislation. So vouchers started out as a way to move kids from public schools to private and religious schools in our country. But today, in almost all of these voucher states, between 65% and 70% of the students that get vouchers have never attended a public school. Only a handful of students, a small percentage of students, actually move from public schools to private schools. And I'll touch on the effect of that in a few minutes. So the voucher system in this country has become essentially a subsidy for families that can already afford tuition at private and religious schools. It is essentially a government handout to these families. So most of the schools that are private and religious, they do not serve the rural communities. So all across the country, vouchers are really focused in the urban areas, whether it's Cleveland or Milwaukee or Phoenix area. Most of the schools in the United States that are private and religious are really clustered in urban areas. So vouchers do not serve rural areas. In fact, in Idaho, about 80% of the private and religious schools are clustered in 4 counties. And in the rural counties, about half the rural counties in Idaho have no private religious school, or they might have one. But that school may be a 2-hour drive. Our counties are so big, it could be 200 to 2-hour drive each way to a private school. So that is one of the key things, is that vouchers do not serve rural communities. Vouchers also put a strain on state budgets, state general fund budgets. And that makes common sense, right? So we only have so much money in our state general fund. And right now, the Idaho schools are terribly underfunded. And not only underfunded, but the school funding across the state is unequal, because many of our school districts rely just on what the state gives, and some of our school districts cannot raise the money locally. So not only are our schools underfunded, we rank 50th in the country for per student funding, but also there's an inequity across our state. So the reason this puts strain on state general fund budgets is because when you go from funding one school system and you start funding two more school systems, a private one and a religious one, it is going to stress and put tension on that state budget. And that is just common sense that is being ignored all over the country. So as general fund money gets stressed, funding goes down for public schools, which means local taxpayers have to raise their own property taxes to keep their schools open and vital. And that's why in Indiana, the Indiana Farm Bureau has taken a position against vouchers, because the farmers and the small Main Street business leaders in the state of Indiana, as well as all these other states, have to raise their property taxes to support their school. So essentially, a farmer in Filer, or a farmer in Gooding, or a farmer in Oakley are subsidizing the private schools so that a corporate lawyer in Boise, Idaho can send their kids to a private or religious school. And that is one of the most unfair things about vouchers. Vouchers, until recently, and even recently, usually start out very small. And the reason the sponsors do that is because if they announce that they're going to have universal vouchers and it's going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars, legislators won't vote for it. So you'll notice that the very first voucher bill that was passed in Idaho was a $50 million tax credit. Now, $50 million on a multi-billion-dollar budget isn't a lot of money, so it looks sort of harmless. But the fact is that it always starts out small, and it grows, and it grows, and it grows. So, for example, in Arizona, they passed the first universal voucher bill 2 years ago. It was supposed to cost $35 million the first year, $65 million the second year. In 2-3 years, that has grown to almost $1 billion. It has put such a strain on the general fund budget that the legislature this session is facing a $1 billion deficit, and it's canceling road projects. It's cutting school funding, community college funding. You got CSI here. It even cut a $133 million water project in the most thirsty state in the country. So these vouchers cost a lot of money. And just an example, already today, the cost of this program in Idaho is already skyrocketing. So the legislature estimated when they first introduced the bill that it would cost $125,000 to administer this, the tax commission. Then Wendy Horman, sponsor of the bill, upped it a few weeks ago. Oh no, it's going to cost $255,800. This week it was announced that the administration of this law will cost $675,000. So it went from $125,000 to $255,000 when the bill passed, and now we're looking at $675,000. And that is, you're going to see that from now on every year if they keep adding money to this program, because that's the history in every state. It just grows like a weed. So I want to talk about a couple myths about vouchers. The first myth is you hear a lot about parental choice. We got to give parents a choice. And of course, we have a lot of choice in Idaho. We have homeschool, we have charter school, we have neighborhood schools, we have Catholic schools, we have Lutheran schools. We have a lot of school choice in Idaho. But the thing about vouchers is that parents don't choose the schools choose the students. And that's really important, because across the country, schools are discriminating against students on religion, on race, on special needs, on learning disabilities, and sometimes just behavior. They take a student and the student has some issues and they just expel the student and they end up back in the neighborhood school. In the South was the first place vouchers were used after the Supreme Court ordered the desegregation of schools. It was a way to get around segregating, integrating schools in the South. And to this day, across the South, in North Carolina, Mississippi, and other states, there are what they call segregation academies. Some are religious, some are private, but they receive state money and they discriminate against the black kids. ProPublica did an amazing investigation into this last year. You can look it up. They're called segregation academies. So schools across the country are still discriminating against kids. The other myth about this is they say that kids that move from public schools to private and religious schools do better academically. And remember, that was the whole reason vouchers were created in the first place. Well, all the research shows, both pro-voucher researchers and anti-voucher researchers show that students that move from public schools to private or religious schools do not do better. In fact, many of them do worse when they transfer, and then they transfer back to the public schools. So those are two of the myths that I think we need to break. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is that under vouchers, there's no accountability, there's no transparency. So unlike the public schools that have to post their budget online every year, private schools, religious schools, they don't post their budget. The people who run these schools, the school trustees, they're not elected by the people. If a parent is unhappy with a school, they can't recall or they can't elect somebody else to be on the school board. They essentially have to disrupt their child's education and move them to a different school. So there's just no accountability, no transparency. So I'm often asked, well, is there anything good about vouchers? And I have to say honestly, and I mean this sincerely, and it's based on research, I can't find a redeeming benefit to this program. And I think historians are going to look back, and they're going to look at this and say it's the biggest government handout in the history of the states. And they're going to be scratching their head about how this happened. And I'll tell you how it happened. In every state, including our state, these billionaires that want to defund and abolish public education spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, and in states like Wisconsin, millions of dollars. And they have these front groups, Americans for Prosperity, a Charles Koch group, American Federation for Children, a front group for Vets and DeVos, and I could just go down the line. These billionaires come into the state, they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on lobbying, and when they can't get their way, like in Idaho, they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars defeating anti-voucher legislators. And in the last 2 election cycles, they have taken out so many of our great pro-education legislators that they finally defeated enough and elected enough to pass vouchers this year. And they did it in Texas, which has resisted vouchers for 20 years. They took out all these anti-voucher legislators. One guy was a 7th-generation Texas rancher. They've done it in Tennessee this year, and they're going to pass vouchers in Tennessee, Texas, and Idaho this year. And we've all been homeowners. So with that, I hope I didn't impress you. If I did, I'm sorry. With that, I'm going to introduce our panel. And this is Chanel's kind of set up this, just notice we've got guys on one side and the women on the other. We'll deal with that. So, Brady Dickinson probably doesn't need an introduction for a lot of folks here. He is the superintendent of the Twin Falls School District. He grew up in North Idaho. He attended North Idaho College and then the Harvard of the West, the University of Idaho.
Vandals.
And in 2016, he received his PhD from the University. He's been a lifelong educator here in the Twin Falls School District, starting at Robert Stewart Junior High, and 30 years ago. And he's moved his way up all the way to superintendent of schools here. He was awarded the Milton Award for the state of Idaho, and in 22 was recognized as Superintendent of the Year. And I know, because I've worked with Brady quite a bit over the years, he's one great superintendent. Next to Brady is David Carson. He's the superintendent in Gooding, Idaho, those senators. He too has been an educator for 30 years. 24 of those years in administration. He earned his Associate of Arts degree from Reds College over in Rexburg. He followed that up with a bachelor's degree in earth science education from Boise State University, and he's pursued a master's degree in education leadership from the University of Idaho. He is passionate about leadership, and he's passionate about getting involved in the community, including the Rotary Club. And next to David is Stephanie Snar. Stephanie is a local homeschool parent with 15 years of experience as a homeschool parent. She knows the rewards and challenges that come with making the choice to be a homeschool parent. Her homeschooling efforts, she volunteers for many organizations in the Magic Valley as she collaborates with other parents, educators, and leaders to create a positive impact in our community. And next to Stephanie is Dr. Debbie Burr. Dr. Burr is a native Idahoan. She was born in Moscow, the home of the Harvard of the West. And she's called, there's a pattern here, like all 3 of these twins have been here for 30 years. Must have been like an in-migration. She has a bachelor's degree in mathematics from the University of Idaho and a doctor of pharmacy from Idaho State University. And throughout her career, Debbie has demonstrate a deep commitment to education, particularly in the state of Idaho. And she served for 13 years on the board of trustees of Xavier Charter School here in Twin. And she's also served in leadership roles for the Idaho School Board Association as vice chair and chair over the years. So all four of these really good folks have a tremendous background in education. So I'm going to start, maybe we'll start with the ladies, if that's okay. Dr. Berg, maybe you start off. The question that was posed for each of you is, how do you think vouchers will affect your particular education sector?
Can you guys?
I want to remind you, write questions out on the school cards. Somebody will pick them up, give them to me, and try to answer as many questions as we can. I'm sorry.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. I'm actually really excited because I thought I was going to have to go last, so I was pretty sure that everybody. I might just hold this actually.
Yeah.
I was pretty sure that everybody was going to say everything that I was going to say, and I was going to have to think of something else to say by the time I got down to me. But hey, I get to go first. This is great. What I didn't mention in my bio is I actually, my husband and I raised 2 children here, and they both graduated from Xavier Charter School. And as a parent, I was very thankful for the fact that in the state of Idaho we have choices about how we want to educate our kids, and that mattered to my family. And after listening to Rod about vouchers and why nobody would ever possibly ever want to do those things, I'm actually going to tell you, in general, I've been in favor of a voucher bill. It was interesting to serve with Idaho's School Board Association because I was one of the few people that would even want to have a conversation about that. But I was extremely disappointed in the legislation that was proposed and passed this year in the state of Idaho. And the reason for that, and it goes back to what you said about Stephen Covey's approach, is like know where you want to end up before you begin. It's like, I want to talk about student achievement. It's like, what do we want for our students? It's not for me about the money. It's not about really anything other than that. As a population, we deserve to have our children be educated, and they should be educated in ways that make sense for them. I'm also not a big fan of we educate our children only to make sure that they get into whatever career they want to get in. I actually find value in education for education's sake. One of the reasons why I enjoy charter schools, because there's a lot of approaches to education that are a little bit different than traditional public schools. And I chose the educational experience for my children because I wanted them to grow up to be virtuous citizens. That's what Xavier does. But there's an approach to education that we want our children to be educated. I wanted my children to be educated in a certain way, and that's why I was able to choose that sort of thing for me. So when I saw this voucher bill that was passed, the first thing that stood out to me was the fact that there's absolutely no accountability for student achievement built into this bill. I think I'm fairly unique in the ability to kind of speak to how they set it up, because I am also married to a local CPA who has done school district audits for more than 40 years. And boy, I've heard an earful from him about the bill, because the accountability for student achievement in this legislation lies with the Idaho State Tax Commission. And I'm sure that those individuals are amazing and very good at their job. That's why they are in the positions that they're in. But I can tell you that I would highly doubt that any of them are ready and able to do any type of being over and holding these sort of programs accountable for student achievement. What was written in the bill is very brief. It's one sentence long. It's like parents must provide a portfolio or some sort of an assessment that demonstrates student growth. I don't even know what that means. I'm pretty sure the Idaho State Tax Commission does not know what that means. Being a pharmacist, my state board of pharmacy, when Idaho legislators pass bills, they will promulgate rules that say, oh, this is how we're going to interpret that stuff that came out of the legislation. I assume that the Idaho State Tax Commission might do that, but they might not. There's nothing to say that they have to. And because being married to a CPA and stereotypes come from somewhere, there's probably going to be a predisposition to check a box. It's like, yep, I was shown a piece of paper that said that a student had growth this last year. We don't even know what that means. Did they finish a grade level? We don't even know what that means. So for me, that was probably the biggest concern that I had coming out of that legislation, was the fact that we are now going to allow folks who are not educators and also not really even parents necessarily to determine what growth is going to look like for students. So another way that this is going to affect charters in particular, because that's going to be my perspective, is the fact that charter schools really must rely on only the funding that comes from the state. We have no capability as a charter school to go ahead and run a levy. If you have any type of an unexpected expense, you can't run an emergency levy. You can't run a supplemental levy. You can't obviously run a facilities levy. No levy can be run by a charter school. They are organized as nonprofit entities, and they may not do those sorts of things. So the types of ways that they are able to obtain facilities is they have to go, they can issue bonds kind of like St. Luke's, because St. Luke's is a nonprofit. Charters are organized under the same exact law in the state of Idaho. So they can issue bonds that way, but it's very difficult. You have to get a bond rating. It's a very long process and very difficult to do, because even though we receive state funding as a charter school, we're not considered a very good credit risk, so it's always difficult to get a good credit rating. But we have to manage on the money that comes from the state. The reason that this voucher bill is going to be difficult for charter schools is because as students churn, and I'm going to use that phrase because what we're seeing in charter schools now is that children, I mean, the data may say that kids aren't transferring from public schools into these private or religious schools, but what I've seen in experience is kids spend a lot of time figuring out where they want to be. And at our charter school, you would see kids come in, stay for a couple of years, go out, don't like where we went that time, so we're going to come back. And so you've got a lot of churn. And so as that happens in a charter school, and funding right now in our state is completely dependent on attendance in your school, you will definitely see an impact on the amount of money that comes into the charter schools. And as Rod was saying, it's like right now the pot of money that they've decided, and they're very proud of the fact that they didn't take it from the public school funding. It's its own separate bucket. But the fact is, it's going to affect our bucket for public school funding. And in charter schools, that can be just very problematic, especially if you see a real decrease in the amount of students, and then all of a sudden you have an increase, but your funding's not based on this new increase. It's based on what was going on last year. So I expect to see that will become a real problem for the charter schools. Second thing I think that we'll see, and it's not going to be unique to charter schools, but as you see students and parents make choices about where their student wants to go to school, and we don't have any accountability for growth, is you have a student that maybe started someplace for school, went out to some other private or religious or homeschool or any other thing, and there's nothing, I'm not saying anything good or bad about any of those choices, but we don't know where the growth is going to come from. And then you have a student who wants to come back into another educational opportunity, and at this point we don't even know where that student is academically. So it sets our kids up for failure. If they've been out for 2 years, you expect them to have followed the same course as the rest of their cohort, and so they come back in, you expect them to be 2 grades ahead, and really they're not. And the reason they're not is because they chose an opportunity for themselves that didn't provide them with that opportunity for growth, and now they're back at your place of education, and now you have to do something with that kid. Everybody wants our kids to succeed. We all want our kids to be educated and to be successful and to graduate and to be able to do whatever it is that they're going to be doing in life. But if we see them growing, not growing, this place, that place, all of the churn that can happen because the voucher bill will make it easier for folks to do that. I think that is going to become a problem no matter where they are. No matter if they come back into traditional public school or if they stay in the homeschooling situation or if they change from charter school to charter school, because we saw an awful lot of that as well. So I think that those are probably the biggest concerns I had from the charter school perspective.
Thank you. Now we'll hear from Stephanie Snar, homeschool perspective on that.
Thank you. As a homeschool parent, I think a lot of the concerns we have mirror concerns that Debbie presented. Is that better? Sorry about that, you guys. I was just saying a lot of the concerns we have, and I think you're going to see that across the whole panel, are going to be mirrored. As taxpayers, as parents, we all have those accountability concerns. We all want to be able to see where that money is going, to see progress that students are making, and making sure that adequate growth is there. So that accountability is something you're going to see across the board as far as a concern with any type of school choice or school voucher bill. I wanted to hit on something that Rod shared a lot about, all of the finances and the costs and how we've seen those these examples from all of these other states, but something else we've seen aside from the cost to the taxpayers is the cost to the parents. We've also seen that tuition goes up. As a homeschool parent, we've seen that curriculum goes up. The cost of participating in extracurricular classes, a lot of homeschool parents will choose a music class or an art class or something of that nature, and we've seen those costs go up. And so that's a really big concern. I think it's really important to remember that anything that the government funds, the government controls. They have a right to be asking for that accountability. And so we keep hearing, the money is going to follow the child and all of these other promises. And that's true that this money might stay with the child, but as it stays with your child, it's also going to come right through your front door. And it's going to come into your living room, and it's going to have a seat at your kitchen table. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't want the government to have a seat at my kitchen table when we're having family dinner. That's our home. And so as homeschoolers, we want to keep that part out of the homeschooling system. And what the voucher system does is it opens up that opportunity. So the way House Bill 93 is written, homeschool parents have the opportunity to file for this credit, or they can choose not to. But when we look at what's happened in other states, just like you presented, is that following year they come back and they make changes to where they're asking for more accountability, or they're limiting curriculums that you can choose from, and they're eventually leading to testing, which some homeschool parents aren't willing to participate, and things of that nature. And so as a homeschool parent, we want to make sure we're protecting the freedoms that we currently have, and those freedoms have been fought for decades, actually. A lot of people I've talked to the last couple of months have no idea that in Idaho in the 1980s, we actually jailed parents for homeschooling. They were guilty of no other crime, but merely wanting to school their children at home. And that is not something that we want to even get close to happening again. So we want to maintain the freedoms that we have and keep all of our educational choices open, and we feel like having a voucher system is going to limit those choices instead of continuing to offer choices.
Thank you very much. Now we'll hear from David Carson from Gooding.
Great, thank you. Just a little more context about me. I'm a native Idahoan, and I was raised on a family farm in southern Idaho. And so I have spent most of my career in rural, agriculturally based communities because of that. That's something I draw to and have experience with, and so my lens is always from that perspective. And so in looking at vouchers and just being a superintendent in a public rural education system, most of the school districts in Idaho are small rural districts. And so this voucher system is going to definitely affect all school districts, but I would propose that it's going to affect those small rural agriculturally based the most. There's many reasons, and Rod did a great job of, he kind of took all the talking points. You can just take what he said, and you're pretty well educated, so thank you. You did well. But when I look at these things, as was mentioned, Debbie mentioned student achievement is always at the priority. How is this going to help students achieve academic success? And I haven't found any research that says that it does. Accountability. As a public school superintendent, we get pounded into us every year, accountability from the legislature. We get audited every year. Every dime we spent is, you can find out. It's there. There's no questions. There's total transparency. And I don't see that in House Bill 93. There's not enough accountability to be able to. If I was a legislator, I would be really nervous if I had to justify to my constituents if the system is accountable and I know where those tax dollars are going. The word subsidy has been used, and this is where it's really, it's so true what Rod said is people in Idaho who, because of their location, can't take advantage of a private school opportunity because there's not one around, it's too far, it's just not going to happen. Your tax dollars are paying for somebody else to be able to take advantage of that. And so it truly is a subsidy. That's what, and I just told you, most of the school districts in Idaho are rural. So that tells you who's footing the bill for the people who can take advantage of that choice. And I want you to know I'm not against school choice. I'm all for it. I have no problem with school choice. I just want the playing field to be level. That's all. That's what I've told legislators and anybody who will listen to me. Hey, that's fine, but make it the same. Accountability needs to be the same, whatever that is. And then you heard about homeschool and what a conflict that creates with homeschool parents because they don't want to have that same system to be able to compare and look, and that's okay. But where's the accountability in that? How can you justify where those dollars are going? And then again, just a huge positive about public schools is we take everyone. We take everybody, and always will. And I'm very proud of that. And I, as Rod said, with House Bill 93, the schools choose the kids. You can be denied. There's no guarantee that even if you take this, if you show up, that you're going to be accepted. And so those are some of the conflicts that I have with it.
Thank you. Brady Dickinson, you can bring us home.
Okay, well, I'm going to actually come at it a little bit different angle. I've been collecting my thoughts, not checking how I'm trending on Facebook here, so I'm seeing them on my phone. Doing pretty well, by the way. So, you know. First off, thanks for everybody for being here tonight. It's great to be able to talk to you about this issue. I want to start and make a comment that my colleague made here, and that is that I too support parental choice. I think that parents having the right to choose where they educate their kids is absolutely paramount in this country, and that every parent should have that opportunity and make that choice in terms of what's best for them and their family. Obviously, the issue comes down to on the funding side, but before we even talk about that, let's talk about some other things. And I guess my question is, as I reflect on this and I've spent a lot of time reflecting on it, I can't figure out when or why we became the enemy. And this narrative of that we have a broken school system or that we have a failing school system. So I'd like to talk about that for a second and discuss maybe where that's coming from and what that does in terms of educators. So if I go back to when I went to school to become a teacher, I went into it because I wanted to make a difference. I certainly didn't go into it to make money. I might have thought an idea of not having the summers off sounded nice until I realized I was going to be poor in the summer. But most educators that you talk to, they truly authentically went into education to make a difference. They didn't go into it because they saw it as some bloated bureaucracy they wanted to be a part of, right? And so that's the first thing. And then secondly, if you look at this community, and you go back, I've been studying history a lot here in Twin Falls. And if you go back to the early days of Twin Falls, 1904, about that time period, the people here, when they incorporated and actually broke off from Cassia County and became Twin Falls County, one of the first things they did was form the school district. And we were called a miracle town. We were called a miracle town because we had a school before a saloon. So that should tell you something about the early 1900s, okay? People that moved here, that came out west, they valued education. And so Bickle School was built. And if you read in the paper about the building of Bickle School, the first public school in Twin Falls, there was a grand celebration when that school opened. And you can look at pictures from 1904 and 5, and I think everybody in town showed up for the opening of the school. Okay? So that was a big event in their community. A few years later, Lincoln was built down the street. Both those schools exist today, not the original buildings, so they're a little later. But both those schools exist today. And if you go back and read the paper about when the first cornerstone at Lincoln was put down and the celebration that took place over it. I mean, people, they raised money out of their pockets to build. There was no bond or levy. The people that were farming here, when they started irrigating, they pooled their money together to build that school. They didn't get money from the state. And then Lincoln, that one actually was bonded for. But again, people came out and celebrated. And so I think of that early time period when schools were being built and opened and the communities were rallying around their schools, when the first Twin Falls High School opened, and it was this magnificent building, and people were so, just amazed and proud. You look at that throughout the years, and it just breaks my heart to hear people today say that our system is broken. And then feel like we need to take our money and do something else because our system is failing our kids. And so where does that argument come from? And I guess what I would say, and some of the things that I really struggle with is that these are Idaho schools. Our schools reflect our community. Now, does that mean that we're perfect? No. Does that mean that sometimes teachers make mistakes? Sure. But the narrative that you hear about what happens in schools around the country, I can honestly say that in Twin Falls, yeah, people have made mistakes from time to time, but the narrative is not true. And the picture that's being painted to say that we're a failing system, I'm telling you, is wrong. And I would invite anybody to come and visit. You can pick the school, you can pick the classroom, you can pick the day, and I will take you there. And you can see for yourself that what the things that you hear that make us failing just are not happening. Now, there are rules we have to follow, right? From our government. We can't, according to current Supreme Court laws and all those things, we can't do some things in schools that some parents want in terms of like religious activities and whatnot. And that's why private schools exist. But that doesn't mean that we as taxpayers fund those choices. And so, if it is the public school that, doesn't have those kinds of things happening and parents want them, then I absolutely think they should. Again, back to schools serving the communities, I just want to give a couple of examples and then I'll move on. During the Great Depression, lots of people here in Twin Falls didn't have indoor plumbing yet at that time. PTOs were bringing kids into the schools so that kids could take baths. And we're actually providing, soap and ways for kids to take showers when that wasn't available. During World War II, lots of the men had gone off to war, and the fields around here needed workers. Guess who did it? It was the students, because the schools closed down so that kids could go out into the fields and help harvest. And so the schools have always been this important part of our society. What happens today? We have food pantries in our schools. And so we do backpack programs. If people need food, we send food home with our kids in backpacks. And our schools really strive to be neighborhood schools. When it comes to achievement, you can pick and choose your statistic. I can give you statistics that will show that our schools are knocking it out of the park. I can find another statistic that shows that we're struggling in certain areas. It all depends on where you want to hang your hat, right? Because I can find those statistics that show we're successful, and I can also find statistics that show we need to do better in some areas. And so do we need to do better in some areas? Absolutely. What are the biggest hurdles that we have, though? When you look at public schools today, I would put our highest achieving kids against any kid in the nation. At one of our high schools this year, we have 6 Merit Scholars finalists, and that's in a public school. Okay. Now, do I have schools where kids are struggling? I do. But I'll tell you, you know what the number one predictor, the number one factor that correlates almost every time to student achievement is? It's socioeconomic status. If you pick a school that has high socioeconomic status and you look up their student achievement, they're almost always near the top. If you find a school that's in poverty and you pick up and you look at their student achievement, it's always lower. And so as a society, that's what we should be targeting. We should be looking at that and saying, how do we level the playing field so that our kids that are in poverty schools are rising and making, getting to where they need to be. Not looking at that and saying, well, this is a failing system, we should send them to a different school. And so I just really think that that here in Idaho and across the country, we're just thinking about this the wrong way. And to me, it just really saddens me to hear this narrative of where we are within our system. And I guess I'll close and then I'll get off my soapbox here. I love our school system. Do we have our challenges? Absolutely. Am I trying to indoctrinate kids? Absolutely not. If I could indoctrinate your kids, they would come to school on time and turn their homework in. But every kid is welcome in our school system. Whether I have kids in schools right now whose parents are incarcerated. I have kids in school right now who are hungry. I have kids in school right now who parents work with them every night around the kitchen table, who take their kids on vacations to go visit fantastic places. And we have the whole range as an education system. But that's what made this country great. We live in the greatest country in the world, and we did it with public schools. And I don't think we should forget that.
We'll give you back the mic because I've already got my own.
So thank you so much, everyone. You're just turning in all these great questions. I hope we could get to something about 40 minutes. So my son, this is the first question. My son is autistic again in school. He had a full-time aide. What will this do for students like him? Can they attend a private or charter school? What will happen to the funding they have for students who have disabilities? Maybe David or Brady, you guys can answer that.
I'll take a shot at that. So, with House Bill 93, there are dollars. It's $5,000 for per student, and then if your student needs special services, up to $7,500. So parents can take advantage of that money, but again, and this, I just heard this morning at a meeting that we were at, but one of the private religious institutions in our state was asked that question, well, what would you do with the special education parent who came to you that said, I have these dollars, I want to spend it at your place? And guess what the answer was? We're not letting them in. So, can you say that money would be used in that school? Yes, you can say that. But will that actually happen? That's the question. And more often than not, the question is going to be no. I mean, we don't have the services for your child here. And the school can choose to do that. So to me, that's the issue.
I do want to mention that charter schools are the same as public schools. I think that recognizing that in Idaho there is your public school, which is your school district, and then within school district you have charter schools, which are commissioned in a couple different ways. So charter schools, just to make sure that we're very clear, they're public schools. So charter schools follow the same rules so Xavier follows the same rules that I follow as a Clintville School District. So I do want to stress that. But yeah, I think that the biggest challenge that you're going to see is that within the special ed realm, for private schools, because most of the time those services don't exist within that system. So that could be a barrier for some parents that want to select to go to a charter school. They may not be able to get as much support in that way. But again, that's going to have to be a choice that they make when selecting what schools to utilize. I didn't even take
Oh, that's fine. I was just going to mention the same thing you did, is that charter schools are actually public schools, are publicly funded very similarly to traditional public school districts. There's just a few differences in terms of how we have to use the money, but it's funded the same. So you wouldn't necessarily be able to use those dollars at a charter school because the services that are provided to students there are at no charge, just the same as the traditional public school. If you as a parent wanted to provide services outside of the realm of whatever educational institution you put your child, I think the monies could probably be used for that as long as it was for educational purposes, but you wouldn't pay for that at a charter school just like you wouldn't pay for that at a traditional public school. So I just want to make sure that was clear. So thanks, Rick.
Yeah, and the one thing, can I add one thing?
Sure.
And then I'll stop. So right now, homeschool kids can come to the public school for classes. And so some kids come to the Twin Falls School District because they want to do band or they want to take some other electives, and that's fine. We had a lot of questions about, well, does that make me ineligible for the tax credit? That's a really, really good question for parents to ask if you are planning to take advantage of the tax credit, because it might, there's a rule in there about you can't attend a public school. So I'm not a tax expert, so I can't give you advice on that, but before you look in, if you do have your kid taking a class or two, you'll want to know.
Stephanie, you want to answer?
Yes, I do want to add a little bit to that because we actually do have a child that's dual enrolled. So we do part of the schooling at home, and she takes calculus at the local high school where she's receiving dual credit. So credit from CSI for that. And the fact that she's participating in that program would disqualify her or disqualify us as parents for using the tax credit for House Bill 93.
Yeah. So I'm going to just, some of these questions, I think, if it's okay with the panel, I'll just answer quickly. So can homeschool parents get the $5,000 tax credit for each child? Yes. As long as the money, we only have $49 million now for that, so yes. Then the follow-up is, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, do teachers in the private and religious schools have to be certified? And I believe that they do not have to be certified teachers. So is that correct?
That's correct.
That's correct.
Let's see. I've got this question, and this might be good for Brady and David to answer. And it kind of relates to what you guys are saying, but this person said, now that vouchers in Idaho are passed, one could argue the need for school districts to collaborate with their community, develop quality relationships with their entire school community is even more important than ever before. What are the school districts, administrators, and school boards plan to do to engage with their community to develop stronger relationships?
That's a great question.
Yeah, it is.
You want to tackle it first?
No, you go ahead. Did you have some good examples?
One thing that competition does, I think it challenges you in many areas. And so back to the choice, competition is often good. And so I do think that it makes us better in these areas. I think for public schools, we have to evolve and really target and make sure we're providing services our communities want and providing the education that the community wants and demands. One of the things that we're doing in Twin Falls that you may have seen in the papers, we're converting one of our elementary schools to a magnet school. We're going to do a dual immersion magnet school, which I'm really excited about. This is an experiment for us, and if it goes well, then I think we're going to continue down this path of looking at what kind of options with our elementary schools in terms of those magnets. We may look at a fine arts magnet, or we may look at a STEM magnet, or there's any range of topics that you can do, but I think really understanding what your community wants out of its school system is important, because if your school mission and goals don't align to your community, then people are naturally going to look for other options. And so, one of the things that we're going to be doing is going through our strategic planning process, and we're going to be asking those questions to make sure that our schools are aligned to what our community wants.
And to add to that, in Gooding, we have a unique situation. We have a charter school within the community, and a lot of smaller communities like that don't have that. So we've had competition in Gooding for a while, and that does create competitiveness, and that's okay. But we have to respond to that. In public education, as Brady mentioned, we have to get used to the idea that we're not the only option in town, that everybody has to come to us, and there's not that sense of urgency. So within the community of Gooding, that's been a good thing, and it has made us communicate better and more often and look for other ways. And this year, if you've been to Gooding, there's one main street that kind of goes through town, and you can see everything. You drive that one way. Well, we had a reader board on one of the businesses allowed the district to put a reader board up there, and we replaced that this year with a really bright, shiny, very easily seen reader board that it's important to us. And the board chose to spend $60,000 on a reader board related to our strategic plan, and how are we going to communicate better with our community? How are we going to publicize and get out in the community the good things that are going on within the district? And that was a decision that they made purposefully with that goal in mind, that reader board is important. It's on the main drag. It's one of the most visible reader boards in the town on Main Street. And so that's just an example in, small town Gooding, Idaho, how the district views that, and we do need to do better at communicating and letting people know what we're doing. That helps transparency and just good communication to happen. So that's an example for us.
Thank you. This question, I'm not sure, maybe you guys have answers to this. If not, it shows the flaw in the argument here. How will the state tax commission determine if a student is a special education student and get the $7,500 compared to another student that gets the $5,000? Anybody know that? Can you read the mind of the Idaho legislature on this one? Should we just say that's what?
Well, in the law it says that a qualified medical professional, recommendation from them, or an individual education plan or an IEP. So in order for a family to get an IEP, they have to be in a district that will do that. So that responsibility is going to fall back on the public districts to do that identification with at additional costs that then again that student won't be attending our schools and will go somewhere else. So that's another one of ways of an indirect cost of that process. So those are the two ways that I read in there in the law here recently of how that could happen.
So I'll try to answer this question. The bill passed is not a voucher-based law, I guess. It is a tax credit. There is a difference. Please explain. Well, that is true. As I think I said at the beginning, there are three main ways that the voucher system works. And I use that word generically for all three because it's just easier. The first is the voucher scholarship. That was the traditional way vouchers were got to private schools or religious schools. Then the newest and most popular right now is called an education savings account. And it's basically is like a credit card. It gives a parent, in some states, $8,000 per student. And basically they can spend that on several things, although they're finding there's some fraud in that because I just read an article today. People are buying golf clubs, they're buying trips to Disneyland. One person submitted a claim for a $5,000 Rolex watch, which, so that's very popular right now. And that's going to be introduced, well, it has been introduced already in Idaho. We killed it, but it will come. The third is tax credit, and that's a little bit more complicated. The first two take money directly from the state general fund. The tax credit diverts money from the general fund. I use an Idaho example of this. You're a farmer, and you're dependent on this water on East Canyon County because the water comes out of Fort Peak and all that. And the water is supposed to get down to you around Lake Gold. Well, if somebody takes that water and they divert it into a ditch or a canal, then that water is being diverted. And that's the same with tax credit. The money was supposed to end up in the general fund, and it's being diverted from that fund. Then there's a question here about whether that means the brain amendment. Well, first of all, we can kiss goodbye to the brain amendment because the Supreme Court has ruled that when we spend the very first dollar on a private school, we have to give money to a religious school. So one of the terrible things about this bill, I'm sorry to
one of the terrible things about this bill is that they changed the Idaho Constitution by statute instead of a vote of the people. In other words, they did an in-run around our Constitution, which was established in 1890. The Brayman was in there in 1890. So basically, Supreme Court, because we're going to give money to private schools, the Brayman Amendment was just blown up in this last legislative session. So that's the difference. One diverts money, the other one directly takes it out. It's already been shown that over 80% of Idahoans are against this bill, but unfortunately we have it now. So let's stop debating how bad it is and start discussing what we can do with it now that we have it. What can rural parents make this, how can we make this work for us? Anybody want to tackle that one?
My concern is that it's just going to grow, and so I guess for me, you're right. It's here, and so I think we have to watch carefully how and what kinds of and how quickly it expands, and what kind of accountability pieces go in on this for sideboards. And so I think as citizens, we watch it closely, and then if it doesn't work, then we ask for changes. And if we're not getting the results we want, or if we start seeing that there's fraud, that's what happens with all new programs. We have to watch it carefully, and then we have to go to our legislators if they're if in fact we do want to see that change. But you're not wrong. Part of the challenge that we have here in Idaho is that we're already anemic when it comes to funding. We are 50th in the nation, depending on where Mississippi is any given year. So sometimes 49th, sometimes 50th. And that's the hard part, I think, for us, is that, you look at the system, we're already 50th, and now you're shaving off for a different system. And so Idaho has been fiscally conservative for a very long time, and we believe strongly in that our taxpayers are used as they're designated to be used and used appropriately, and I wouldn't approach this any differently.
I was going to say, it was surprising to me when I got involved with Xavier Charter School back in 2010 as just a lay parent who knew absolutely nothing about education. It was really surprising to me how approachable our legislators are about how important it is for us to have conversations with the people that are within the circle of our influence. So I do believe that one of the ways that we can do this is, just like Brady said, is to really pay attention to what's happening, but to hold our legislators accountable for the legislation that was passed. If we're looking for how do we measure student outcomes with this legislation, no matter who's doing what with that money, how do we measure that? How do we look at it? How do we know that we're getting bang for our buck for the money that we're throwing at whatever the parents are doing? How do we know that? I would really encourage everybody to talk to your state legislators. They are all reachable by email, and most of them are very reachable by phone. They live in our communities. They will talk to you. It really did surprise me. They're just people like we're people. It was a big thing for me as, a parent who'd never had any kind of contact with my state legislators. And so it's not a scary thing to do, but it's a really important thing to do. So I would just encourage everybody to do that. Have those conversations. Talk to our legislators. Send information to our legislators. Ask the question, it's like, so what are you doing to make sure that this money is being spent wisely and that our students are being prepared for their life? That's what we want to have outcomes, the outcomes for our students. So I'd encourage you to do that.
Thank you. So I'll try to answer this question. It's, do you believe that a lawsuit will be filed against the voucher? So I've had many conversations with Jim Jones about this, our former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and he is seriously looking at a lawsuit. Not sure what form that will take. I think he's still trying to think about that. I haven't talked to him for a couple of weeks, so I don't know what his current thinking is. In fact, I've got to do that. So, I think I find this very unfortunate, but I think the coalition members that have fought vouchers have decided that we will not seek a referendum on this. for various reasons. One is that the state law makes it virtually impossible to get a referendum. After the Luna laws were passed, or repealed, I should say, the legislature passed new legislation that makes it just about impossible to get a referendum on the ballot. So, but I do know that Jim is seriously thinking about that. Let's see. I'm not sure what this means. Maybe somebody wrote this thing. What ways could be implemented to level the playing field and still offer choice? I don't know if that's financial or what.
Well, I would, personally, I think that anybody that's taking public money should have to accept all kids. I mean, I don't know. I think there's a couple of different things. There's layers to that question, Rod. I mean, I do get frustrated when private schools do have the ability to turn kids away and there are public funds involved. From a taxpayer standpoint, for us in the school district, you could go on my website right now and look up every expenditure. And it's really great reading material if you want to fall asleep. But every single expenditure is on our website, and every year we get audited. You could go and read our audit report. That's another page turner. But every year in October we have an audit, and so every dollar is accounted for. And so I don't know about leveling that levels the playing field, but I do think that when it comes to private school anyway, you don't have elected boards, you don't have required audits, you don't have websites with transparency links on them, and so those are the kinds of things that I think I would like to see if public funds are actually going to support those entities.
I think we touched on this, but we can emphasize it. How will vouchers affect the rural schools within Idaho? Anybody want to tackle that?
Yeah, in rural schools, probably the thing that takes enrollment from rural schools the most is probably homeschool. Homeschool parents in Idaho, and that homeschool movement has really grown over the years. There's a lot more resources for parents, very good resources that they can use and utilize. So as you're taking that enrollment out of the school, that's how we generate. Dollars are generated for public schools. Is one of those main ways is enrollment. How many kids are showing up every day? So you decrease that number, you're taking dollars away, and dollars mean people. So that's the biggest effect, and it's been mentioned is just that whittling away of those general fund dollars that could go to roads, could go to a lot of things. Public schools is one of those in that pot. So just the gradual eroding of that over time, if more dollars are diverted, it really hits smaller communities because they don't have as big a tax base, and there's just a lot of things where that just makes the problem even bigger in those situations.
It's actually going to probably be the same in bigger school districts because 80% of our budget goes to pay for staff, and so when you start having reductions, it's going to be in staff. You just don't have that much else that you can't buy fewer pencils and save that kind of money. You're going to be downsizing, and so when you start downsizing, the first things to go are your elective type offerings, and so because you're going to always have your core that you're required, your math, your science, your English. It's the art and the music and all of those pieces that start coming into question. And so when we talk about dollars being diverted, because our schools are pretty lean, you're talking about staff within the system.
I will say that my research on this issue shows that early on, as early as the 1950s, it was stated that to abolish the public schools, you had to drive down the trust and credibility in the public schools. And then people would be looking for a solution, and the solution would be privatization of schools. That was a stated goal. It was echoed just 2-3 years ago by Christopher Rufo, the father of the myth about critical race theory. At a speech at Hillsdale College, he openly said, we've got to drive down the trust and credibility of the schools, and then we can privatize the schools. So one of the problems with vouchers is that if it stars the public schools, it's harder to get the kind of results we need. It's a downward spiral. So then the opponents of public education say, oh, look, the public schools are failing our students. Well, no, the government's starving our schools. Big classrooms, teacher turnover, whatever, it hurts, lack of funding. So this is part of the whole strategic plan. So why was House Bill 93 advertised as school choice in Idaho? And Idaho has 9 options for school choice, which are advertised on Governor Little's website. Anybody want to? I don't mind poking the bear, but anybody here want to poke the bear?
I'm just going to say, because that's their advertising shtick. Seriously. And one of the things that I found as I worked on a school board was you could just take any person off the street and talk to them about an education issue, and I can guarantee that nobody knows anything about education. So nobody understands in Idaho, number one, how public schools are funded. They don't understand what kind of choice they necessarily have unless they're in the thick of it as a parent. So they just don't know. So when they have people that spend these dollars and they come from out of state and they come in here and they're just like, okay, we're going to scare the heck out of the population of the state, that's how they do it. They're just like, oh, you need choice, and if you don't vote for this, and you're voting against choice for yourselves, don't you want that as parents? It's a good thing. But they don't say, nobody tells them. It's like, well, you've already got multitudes of choices as a parent to choose good, solid educational opportunities for your kids.
I think the other thing it does, so public schools kind of sway in the political winds a little bit, and it's because of what changed at the national level. So when you have a really conservative president, the rules that come from the feds get more conservative, and when you have a more liberal president, the rules start to get more liberal, right? And public schools, we have to have a foot in both camps. So we're primarily state. I mean, the Constitution's clear. We're governed by the states, but the feds have a little bit of say in what happens within schools, and we can have that conversation all night long, probably over beverages. But we do have to follow those rules. And so, and I will say in some cases we have hurt ourselves. And I would say that not necessarily in Idaho, but we all see what happens in some places, especially states that are more liberal and states that are more conservative, right? A more liberal state probably looks at Idaho and says, wow, I can't believe they do that. A conservative state looks at what happens in a liberal state and says, wow, I can't believe they do that. And then those kinds of things end up being the narrative of what happens everywhere. And so I think that narrative, comes out, and we have to make changes because of what we hear or see and what may be happening in other places. And as those rules change, schools have to adapt to those. I'll give you a good example, and it's a really good one. It's kind of an elephant, right? And that is around, say, transgender issues. Our Title IX rules, just tell me what rule to follow, for goodness sake, right? It changes so much. And so I think for public schools, the narrative is that we're out there somehow driving that, when in all actuality, we just try to follow what the law tells us that how we're supposed to approach that. And so here in Idaho, one thing I am very appreciative of is the fact that our state legislature has adopted rules to try to define some of those things. And so I appreciate that from a school district standpoint. And so I think somewhere along the lines, it became that the schools were driving some of this, when I think it really wasn't the schools driving it, it was society driving it. And schools are trying to figure out how to navigate that space. And also understanding that those rules get changed a lot. And so people that are frustrated with that, I totally get it, because I'm right there with you. I'm frustrated with it too. And so I appreciate when our state legislature or the national really define what those rules are for us to utilize. And I will say this, when those rules don't align with your community standards, that's when we get in trouble. And so when things that happen in a traditionally conservative state when the feds start putting in rules that are seen as too liberal, then that really hurts within your community. And the same thing happens in liberal communities with more conservative standards, and we can argue over who's right and who's wrong. But schools are kind of caught in this tug of war in those scenarios. And so when parents get frustrated with that, trust me, the school system is just as frustrated as you are with it, because we're trying to keep our foot in both camps and figure out how to navigate those rules. And so, yeah, it's tough. And so, just know that when you get frustrated, we are too.
Not sure anybody wants to tackle this one, but I'll ask it anyway. Gaze into your crystal ball, and what is going to be the reaction from the public and from the legislature when it comes light that the voucher funds are being used for a Muslim-based school? There are actually Muslim, frankly, there are Muslim schools across the United States that are funded with vouchers. Jewish schools across the country funded with vouchers, Catholic schools, mainly Catholic schools. But anyway, Muslim schools are definitely funded in other parts of the country, and we have two mosques in Boise.
I think there's a satanic group at Boise as well, but I don't know if they have a school yet.
But they
They could. That's a good question. Generally what happens is they try to put sideboards so the money can't go to places we don't. In Idaho, we preach local control until you use the money how the legislature doesn't want you to use it. And so I think that they'll try to put rules on it, and then that's where they could run into some legal challenges.
Quite frankly, those two mosques in Boise want to form an elementary school and apply for vouchers. Legislature turned that down. They can't give Catholic schools money and turn Muslim schools down. So
I don't think
there's nothing that the legislature can do about that.
Yeah, I don't think once we talked, and the reason we fought so hard against it is that, the old phrase, once the nose of the camel's in the tent, the doors are open. So I do think we have to accept that it's open. I don't see it changing, at least in the short term. And so this is going to be something we have to watch in Idaho. We just have to see how it goes. And then we have to have conversations with legislators if we start seeing our dollars go places we don't want them to go. It's just like every other program. You take education out of the equation, it could be a new farm bill. You're going to have to see the impacts that it has, and then you have to have hard conversations about them. And so I just think as citizens of our state, it's incumbent upon us to watch and have those conversations and see how this goes. But hopefully our legislators will proceed cautiously in terms of how quickly these things are expanded.
Well, I hope you're right. But history shows you. Well, they will be back. And this actually is a nice segue to this question. The reason I say that is in every state, without exception, they keep electing pro-voucher lawmakers. They keep lobbying. In fact, I brought a guy, Chris Lagomi, to the legislature 3 years ago to talk to legislators about vouchers. He's head of the Indiana Small School and Rural School Association. And he told the lawmakers that once you pass the first law, the lobbying doubles. The pressure to expand the program gets more intense. And that is the pattern in every state. So you can bet your bottom dollar that in 26, and if the legislature turns more far right in the 26th primary, which I've got a question on, we will be seeing a universal voucher bill passed in the state of Idaho. And then we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that will be spent. So truly, this is being driven by outside money, billionaires that have more money than Fort Knox has. And the pressure is just going to get worse. Okay, so this might be close to our last question. How do we, as voters, I guess, get better participation in the primary in Idaho to elect people that care about education? What do you guys want to talk about? And maybe that could be another Heinz question. I have an opinion. Why don't we, anybody on the panel want to?
Okay, I'm gonna throw in there. I've actually, believe it or not, within the last year, had this conversation with a community member. I don't know. That's the honest answer. The weird thing is like, I feel like I'm like an old person now because, I've always voted in the primary since I was 18 years old. That's just what you do. I raised my kids to do the same, but they don't vote in the primaries. They at least go vote in the general election. But no matter how many conversations we have about how important it is, particularly in our state, unfortunately, it's more important than it is in some places. I don't know. But it can't happen unless we have the conversations, truly.
Well, we had a great opportunity in this last election to do something about that, and unfortunately it was thumped really bad. And a lot of, again, out-of-state money and some billionaires in Idaho campaigned against that proposition and actually turned the state against it. You have signs all over the state, don't fornicate Idaho. It's actually too late. It's already happened. But we have this great opportunity in May or in June, November to open our primaries back up. But it was a very complicated proposition. Maybe in retrospect, a simple open primaries, which we had in Idaho for 100 years, would have been a better course. But truly, until we get more people to turn out in the primary, we're going to keep getting the government we have. And these legislators are getting elected in these legislative districts by sometimes 20% of the voters, 15% of the voters. They are truly not representative of the people of Idaho. I remember Luke Maywick confronting me once from Coeur d'Alene, maybe some of you know. He had just won his re-election of his legislative seat with something like, there were 15% of the people in his district turned out for voting. He said, what's the business community going to do about this? Well, I'm not quite sure what we can do about it. But the fact is, until we fix our primaries, we're going to keep getting the government we deserve. People just have to start getting engaged. Anybody else want to?
Yeah, for me, I try to stay out of in terms of candidates because as a superintendent, that's not really my role. And so I think, though, just from a citizen standpoint, it's just important to be involved in the process. And, people got upset and, about a number of issues. And there's a lot of things going on at the national level. There's a lot of things going on at the state level. And so I just think that we can't be complacent. And no matter who you vote for, whether you like the folks that are in there now or you don't, I think just staying involved and understanding and researching candidates and just being a citizen. I mean, that's really what we want our kids to do. We strive really hard. I don't ever want to sway kids in our school system to vote a particular way, but I want them to understand when they leave school that they have a responsibility as a citizen to be involved in and following and making sure they participate as citizens of this country. And so I just think that's really important. And so in terms of candidates are going to come and candidates are going to go, but just really encouraging our youth to be educated citizens, I think, is really important.
Well, I think we got to almost all the questions, either answered them or touched on them in one way, so I hope you're happy with that, and thank you for such great questions. And I really think we should give our panel here Thank you to Idaho Solutions for sponsoring this, and Chanel, thank you for organizing it. I hope you guys all have a great evening. Thanks for coming.
You're good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's good to hear your thoughts, and we also live very rurally, so it definitely the homeschool.
Yeah,
You guys, people. Are you guys having a lot of kids?